membership has happened. After holding the observer state status since the year 2005, Iran has become a permanent member of the SCO, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. What will that mean for the bloc, and will this bloc with Iran's addition stand up to the West, in particular when it comes to trade and security? Hi, I'm Kaveh Taqvai. Coming up in today's program, the SCO, a regional organization in the heart of Asia, whose members account for 1/5 of the global GDP, 2/5 of the world's population, and 3/5 of the Eurasian landmass. Now, Iran's President Ebrahim Raisi, on his first maiden foreign trip, was welcomed with SCO membership. Not a bad start. Countering sanctions and increasing trade now more likely for the country. Also coming up in this program, does the SCO now spell a concern for the U.S.? That is something the U.S. needs to think of. Is this the end of U.S. unilateralism? Now the SCO has Iran, China, and Russia on its list, all targeted by the U.S. through sanctions and maximum pressure policy. Has the U.S.-China containment received the blow? A regional organization in the heart of Asia, whose members account for 1/5 of the global GDP, 2/5 of the world's population, and 3/5 of the Eurasian landmass. Such is the combined value of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization's 9 full members: China, India, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Pakistan, Russia, Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, and now Iran.
Iran, Saeed Ibrahim Raisi. Premier. Министр дел Китайской Народной Республики Ван И.
The group did have 4 observers: Mongolia, Afghanistan, Belarus, and Iran, but Iran is no longer part of that grouping. And the SCO has started procedures to admit Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and Qatar as new dialogue partners. Given the enormous extent of geographical coverage, amounting to 35 million square kilometers, and a population as high as 3.15 billion people, the organization has been known to be the greatest producer and the greatest consumer of energy at the same time on a global scale.
上合组织成立20年来，各成员国以上海精神为指引，以构建上合组织命运共同体为方向，推动区域经济合作不断发展，带动相关各国经济增长。
Over its 20-year existence, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization has been mostly seen as a forum for security cooperation to combat extremism, separatism, and terrorism. But now trade and banking are more dominant concerns.
2001年，我与上合组织成员国贸易额为120亿美元，到2020年达2450亿美元，20年间增长20倍。 今年1到7月，我与上合组织成员国贸易额1806亿美元，增幅高达41%。
China and other members of the SCO have made considerable economic and commercial progress in the last 20 years. Annual trade volume has increased by 20 times in 2020. A favorable environment for trade and investments, and achieving free flow of goods, capitals, services, and technologies, especially in the post-era of the COVID-19 pandemic, has become more of a priority issue. These have all been stipulated in the organization's charter. The process of expansion for the SCO was a natural outcome for the organization, waiting to happen. But this occurred years ago, and it appears more nations will follow. Russia and China are the economic powerhouses of the SCO. Some achievements of that organization is that its total GDP reached $16.6 trillion in the year 2017. while approaching EU's 17.1 trillion US dollars and accounting for almost 25%, close to 21% actually, of global GDP. Well, the SCO is expected to surpass the US in the year 2022. And by 2022, China's total economy will be around $15 trillion, and the proportion of SCO's economies will reach about 26%. So that says quite a lot. Well, joining us for this segment, we have Andre Leung. He is an international and independent China strategist. He's had decades of experience as a senior Hong Kong government official in a variety of fields, including finance, industry, social welfare, and overseas representation. Andre, welcome. The SCO countries, some of the stats covering 1/4 of the Earth's land and nearly half of the human population, a regional organization in the heart of Asia, members accounting for 1/5 of the global GDP, 2/5 of the world's population, and 3/5 of Eurasian landmass. What is the economic capacity of this organization, and has it reached its full potential?
Well, of course, in the organization, the role of China and the economic size of China overshadows everything else. Don't forget that in a different organization called the BRICS, China, Brazil, Russia, and India, China's economy is the sum total is bigger than the sum total of the rest combined. As you rightly pointed out, the organization has been pushing below its weight. But I think the time has come for the organization to adopt a much larger role with the change in Afghanistan.
Okay, thank you for that. We appreciate it, Andre. Let's now take a look at more information about the SCO. It's a lot that encompasses this grouping of countries, and the next piece will enlighten you on that. It's time now for our Info News section of the program. This is where we try to focus on economic news and social news that usually don't make it into mainstream media. Now, our first story occurs in the UK. The headline read, UK empty shelves, a crisis that isn't just down to COVID-19 and Brexit. It's been decades in the making. Now, that's something that many perhaps are not aware of. It went on to say that ever worsening conditions in supply chain jobs have made Britain's shortages inevitable, and a pay rise for lorry drivers won't end them. Now, you combine that with a labor crisis, you bet the UK is worried. Next up, we'll go to the US. 9 million Americans just got the rug pulled out from under them when enhanced pandemic federal unemployment benefits expired there. Now, workers in this country aren't lacking work ethics. They're saying they simply don't have reliable childcare, healthcare, or economic infrastructures to support them in times of crises. Now, while this has happened, COVID-19 is still raging on in that country. So pulling the benefits from these Americans is not coming at a good time. Moving on to China, officially applying to the Asia-Pacific Free Trade Pact. The CPTPP was joined that, and it inked it in 2018. You had 11 countries, including Australia, Canada, Chile, Japan, and New Zealand, that joined it, which in the accord represent nearly 500 million consumers, accounting for 13.3% of the global GDP. Now, the trade agreement is essentially an updated version of the ill-fated Trans-Pacific Partnership, if you remember that. Finally, we go to Sri Lanka. A state of emergency declared there. There's an economic slump. There are food shortages in that country, so bad that the military was deployed to stop the citizens hoarding food amidst shortages of essential goods. The prices of food, including rice, milk, and cereals, have tripled in some areas due to inflation, while many shelves in the government-run supermarkets in the capital, Colombo, are empty. This is our in-depth section where we take a deeper look at today's topic, SCO's economic perspective. Now, in order to get an idea about where the SCO stands compared to the rest of the world, that's our main focus now, let us take a look at this map. Now, this map here is a breakdown of the SCO in terms of the ones that are members, which is in red, the ones who are observers, that's in orange, and the ones who are attendants, they call it attendants. And you can see those members, which are comprised in those three categories. China, India, and Russia, for example, are three of the major members. Of course, Iran, as you can see over here, Iran now is a permanent member, something that obviously is a milestone because Iran had the observer status since the year 2005. Now, the ones remaining in that grouping are Mongolia, Afghanistan, and Belarus. Also noteworthy is to talk about the dialogue partners, which Turkey is in that grouping. And then, more importantly, you have another development. SCO has started procedures to admit Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and Qatar as new dialogue partners. So it's noteworthy to mention that here. Now, our guest Andre Long talked about the China Belt and Road Initiative. Take a look at this. It's good to have your memories refreshed if you haven't taken a look at this. This is basically the China's Belt and Road Initiative, which represents Chinese President Xi Jinping's grand vision, which obviously, as you can see in this map, it starts from China, for example, and you have the breakdown here in the colors. Black are the land routes that from China goes all the way through and is a gateway, as you can see, covering countries like Pakistan, like Iran, all the way through to Turkey, and it's a gateway to Europe. And then you have the maritime networks, which start again from China, for example, from Fuzhou port there in the green. These are all the different ports that it encompasses in this Belt and Road Initiative. Again, Iran being one of the major connecting points between the Far East and then going into Europe. So you can see how that regional integration is what's important. It increases trade and it stimulates economic growth. Okay, now let's take a look at this map. This map is very important, and the reason why this map is important is something that maybe you did not hear about on the one hand, but we're going to tell you right here on Economic Divide, and it's the Polar Silk Road, usually not mentioned in the Silk Road Initiative by China. This is the Polar Silk Road, this one area in the black, which goes around all the way through on top of Russia coming through here, which leads onto Europe. So you can see this is very important. Again, something that's not mentioned. It's called the Polar Silk Roads. And again, the Belt and Road Initiative, important because it's a gateway to Europe and beyond. And these are the others that we just covered in the previous map, which are the maritime routes and, of course, the land routes. So I want to now shock you with something, and it's this map. This map, it's an old map, but take a look at it. The world divided in half. You got the eastern side, the western side, and then you have the eastern side. This is the eastern side comprised of Africa, for example, West Asia, and Asia. This is where most of the trade way back occurred. It was the center of global trade in terms of economic activity. So you see the concentration here as opposed to what you see over here, which is the West. For example, the US is part of this. So taking a look at this concentration gives you an idea about the way that the trade volume way in the past was focused in this area and in this region of the world. Now, these facts cannot be ignored. We're going to talk about now the facts about the SCO in terms of what it comprises. Over 60% of the world's land mass covers the SCO countries cover, and this is a leading institution that says that. More than 1/3 of the world's population, Again, a very important fact to give you a depth about the SCO. Also, we need to mention how it has nearly 45% of the world's energy reserves. Again, very important. And also, it's a combined economy that nearly equals the U.S. gross domestic product. So the SCO, when you take a look at those figures, has significant influence over the world's economy and security. Moreover, the SCO is an organization exclusive of the U.S., which may potentially threaten U.S.'s security and interests. So this question can't be ignored. Shouldn't the U.S. be concerned by the SCO? Now, for a breakdown, professor and political analyst with an economic flair, Mohammad Marandi, joins us. He's a lecturer at the University of Tehran, and he's appeared on numerous media outlets, such as Al Jazeera, such as RT, and also we can mention TRT World. And he joins us now to give us his insight and analysis on this. Professor Marandi, welcome. The SCO meeting this year has admitted Iran finally. And this admission, you tweeted that Iran's membership in the Shanghai Cooperation Organization is another major setback for the U.S. regime. It shows that the U.S. did not have enough influence to convince a single government to block Iran's entry. It's also good news for all of Iran's allies. Can or does the SCO, now Iran has joined it, have the ability to stand up to the West? And will the SCO be able to economically, through trade, stand up to the West?
Well, SCO countries collectively are more powerful than Western countries. And as the balance of power tilts away from Western countries, I think Asia will become even more powerful, comparatively speaking, than today in the near future. The United States and its allies have antagonized Iran, Russia, China, and other countries. They are the ones who've created so many adversaries for themselves because they want to be the hegemon over global affairs. And now that they've done this, now that they've antagonized so many countries, this has created an enormous incentive for countries that are constantly being attacked by the United States to cooperate more than before. So 3 important countries, China, Russia, and Iran, which have confronted American imperial ambitions and have been on the receiving end of U.S. hostility, they are moving closer together, and the SCO provides an opportunity to even strengthen that convergence even further.
The 21st meeting of the Council of Heads of States of the SCO has been held in Tajikistan. This year marked the 20th anniversary of the organization's founding. The Chinese President Xi Jinping called on member states of the SCO to strengthen solidarity and cooperation and build a closer SCO community with a shared future.
将同世界上一切进步力量携手前进，共同做世界和平的建设者、全球发展的贡献者、国际秩序的维护者。让我们高举上海精神旗帜，不忘初心，砥砺前行，沿着构建人类命运共同体的人间正道，开启上海合作组织发展新征程。
Iran was finally approved as a member in his first trip overseas. Ebrahim Raisi welcomed Iran's admission. He said that diplomacy is one of the means to ensure national interests of the countries.
Diplomacy is one of the means to ensure national interests of countries. It is efficient when all sides remain committed to their obligations in practice. Threatening and pressuring other sides weaken diplomacy.
When it comes to Iran's membership at the SCO, this comes at a crucial time due to the JCPOA and Iran nuclear talks. Iran's president has said that Iran's economy and economic progress will not be tied to the outcome of the talks if it did not yield the desired results for Iran.
The world is entering a new era with a new order. Domination and unilateralism are on the decline. International order is moving toward multipolarization and redistribution of power in favor of independent states.
Iran has said that the best solution would be to find intra-regional banking and monetary mechanism to help independent countries deflect illegal U.S. sanctions and pave the way for securing free trade by taking advantage of national currencies or by defining a specific currency as a suitable alternative for the US dollar, something that SCO members are doing.
不能从所谓实力地位出发，推行霸权、霸道、霸凌，应该以联合国宪章宗旨和原则为遵循，坚持共商、共建、共享，要践行真正的多边主义，反对打着所谓规则旗号破坏国际秩序，制造对抗和分裂的行径，要恪守互利共赢的合作观，拆除割裂贸易、投资、技术的高墙壁垒，营造包容普惠的发展前景。
The SCO economies, as explained, make up a major portion of the world economy. But the world economy itself, after the pandemic, is changing in terms of which countries are contributing the most to economic output. Now, SCO as a whole makes up around 25% of the world's economic output. And as countries like China, Russia, and India, and even Iran progress economically, which are projected to be the case, the economic output of the East will then eventually outpace the West, in particular the EU and the US. Now, let's not forget that Qatar and Saudi Arabia are also being considered for joining the organization, which will expand the organization and world GDP as a consequence. Now, both of our guests rejoin us for this final Q&A of the program. Professor Mohamed Marandi. We also have Andre Leung, international and independent China strategist, rejoining us. Professor Marandi, I'm going to first start with you. The SCO countries, in terms of the relevance, in terms of the stats, some of them, 1/4 of the Earth's land, half of the human population. It's a regional organization, the heart of Asia. And in terms of the global GDP, accounting for 1/5 of that. We're looking at Iran to have joined it, a host of countries now, amongst them Russia and China, as you're well aware. Do you think that the economic potential of the SCO has been reached, especially now that Iran has joined it?
Iran's membership in this organization creates an important opportunity for Iran to expand its trade and business and cooperation, both political and economic, with Asian countries. We know that Western countries are on the decline, and the rise of Asia is visible for everyone to see. Iran is critical in West Asia. It is the most important power in Western Asia, so it can contribute a great deal to the integration of the continent as a whole. But also these countries like China, Russia, and other members of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization can help Iran as well to decrease the capability to put pressure on Iran. So all these countries need one another, and as Asia rises and as Western countries decline, this is an important and historic moment.
Okay, Andrew Leung, let me turn to you. This is an important point that I'd like to make. In 2017, you had India and Pakistan becoming the official members. Iran is now a member, and the primary goal of this group is to reduce the risk of conflict between SCO member states. At least that was one of their charters. Joining the fight against the three evils: terrorism, extremism, and separation. But you also have this China One Belt project, which connects these countries. But the U.S. is on a confrontational path with China. Is the U.S. then a threat to these countries and their ambitious economic goals?
Well, I don't think the United States has the appetite or the resources to build as big connectivity projects like the Belt and Road. But as far as don't forget that India is part of the SCO members. and India and China do not see eye to eye always. But nevertheless, it's a member of the SCO, and India is not a total ally of the United States either because of this kind of nuanced, non-aligned foreign policy.
Andre Leung speaking there, International Independent China strategist, and also like to thank Professor and political analyst Mohammad Morandi, who gave us his thoughts and input into this program on the SCO. At this point, I'll be back in our next segment with my final thoughts. There's no denying it. The SCO is now a relevant organization in the world, from trade to security, i.e. fighting extremists and terrorists, especially when it comes to a country like Afghanistan. Now, this bloc of countries stands smack in the face of the U.S., which wants to pursue China economically and militarily. Countries that are in China's sphere, who have been aided through loans for the execution of China's Belt and Road Initiative, especially countries that have been hit by harsh U.S. sanctions like Iran, will stand in the way of U.S. unilateralism. There are even talks of establishing a new monetary system to bypass the Western-controlled SWIFT banking system, like between Russia and Iran. That does it for this edition of the program. Your questions and comments are always welcome. It was great to have you with us. From me, the entire team, it's goodbye.